We are moving on to House District 57, and that is incumbent Republican Perry Will and challenger Democrat Colin Wilhelm. And both last names started W-I-L, so we had to start with the H. So, Colin, 90 seconds, opening statement.
Thank you. So I am Colin Wilhelm. I'm the Democratic nominee for House District 57. And what I'm running for is to represent Rio Blanco, Moffett, and Garfield County. It's a very diverse district. I plan to get down to Denver to do some things to improve our district and work us through the COVID times that have happened. We're in a mental health crisis, a health crisis, and also an economic crisis. And after I declared, when this came about, my priorities ended up shifting a little bit. I want to fully fund K-12 education, which also includes paying teachers across the state of Colorado a living wage. I want to increase access to healthcare, particularly in the mental health care field. That also includes finding a way to lower costs for healthcare and introduce healthcare for cost for mental health care, because many times insurance plans do not cover mental health care, especially here in the Valley. And then we also need to work to diversify our economy up here. We're basically reliant on single industry drivers throughout the 57th district, and I want to work to diversify them and bring in more jobs and keep the jobs that we have right now as we go about doing that.
Mr. Will, 90 seconds, opening statement.
Thank you, and thanks to all the listeners, and thanks to everyone here for doing this. So I'm currently the incumbent. I was appointed to House District 57, and had 2 sessions down at the Capitol. And so I'm a lifelong Coloradan. Been in Colorado my entire life. I've lived and breathed Western Slope, Colorado, and I had an opportunity because I retired from over a 40-plus year career with Division of Wildlife, and had the opportunity, and I've always wanted to be in the General Assembly and as a state legislator, and I love representing the people of House District 57. And there's a multitude of things to work on. I mean, you know, and Colin mentioned the diversity of jobs and the economy here. You know, we have a great recreational economy. We have a great tourism economy. With the COVID, not so much. And then when you get to oil and gas and coal in the Rio Blanco and Moffett counties, as well as the western end of Garfield County, yeah, there's been some boom and bust cycles in that. And we want to keep those jobs, and I strive to do that the best way we can and diversify. And also, I think we need a real, on our energy portfolio, is a diversification of all that. You know, because I was on the interim committee, energy interim committee. I got to see what runs the grid. And, you know, coal and natural gas keep the lights on. Now, renewables, they have a place, you bet they do. But they won't run the grid. And then you talk about more and more electric cars and more demands on the grid. We just need to diversify that. We can't have the whole entire Eastern Plains in as a wind tower or solar panels.
I want to remind you that if you could just face forward and speak to your virtual audience out there.
Oh, sorry.
I wasn't sure where the camera was.
Right. And our timer's over there, so you can maybe see our.
Oh, was the timer after me? She can throw stuff at me.
Okay. First question for Mr. Will. In one of your campaign ads, you allude to a war on Western Colorado's economy and way of life, something to that effect. Who's waging that war, and how would you fight back?
So, well, let me start with saying it. There is a war on rural Colorado. And when you sit in the General Assembly over there with 41 Democrats and 24 Republicans in the House, and then 1916 in the Senate, and with the Democratic governor, there is a war on rural Colorado. The urban Front Range decides everything over there. And so they really, they push their agenda, their policies, and, you know, don't really care about what the effect is over here in the West Slope. And I can't say they don't care, but it appears that way. And we fight back, and I represent rural Colorado. That's what I'm after, is representing the rural part of this state in these 3 counties. And you know, I talked to many of my colleagues over there about the situation with with some of the policies, and they don't seem to change their ideas.
Mr. Wilhelm.
Thank you. Well, I wouldn't classify it as a war. I think a war is a very strong term, and probably not one that we should use unless we're involving our loyal soldiers and heroes. But it sounds to me more what Mr. Will is describing is a difference between a partisanship between Republicans and Democrats. The numbers that he laid out were partisan numbers and showing how the Democrats run the House and control the Senate and control the governorship. And that's true. That means that you have to work within the boundaries that you have. That doesn't mean that you go to war against people and not compromise. So when I go down to Denver, what I intend to do is work with people across all aisles. I've been on the road since I declared this campaign, and virtual as well, talking to thousands of people, having different conversations from all walks of life and political backgrounds to come up with ideas. I take their ideas, mix them with my ideas, basically put them into a bowl, mix them together, and hopefully bake a cake of some really good solutions for our common ideas. And that's what I intend to do, work across the aisle, work with everybody. But most importantly, when you're doing that, you have to still fight for Western Colorado in the 57th district.
Mr. Will, your response.
Yeah, so my response to that is I'm probably the most bipartisan representative in the House over there. In fact, yesterday I just received an award from independent bankers for being the freshman legislator of the year. They haven't given that award to a freshman legislator since 2001. And they've done that because how I stick up for my constituents over here and how I work across the aisle in a bipartisan manner. So, maybe my words were a little harsh on the war, but I perceive it as that on Western Colorado.
Mr. Wilhelm, shortly after announcing your candidacy, you were quoted in a Post-Independent article last November. I saw that there were some deficiencies in our representation, and I felt that the people needed to be represented more. What deficiencies are you referring to, and what more would you bring?
Well, when I looked at the voting record of Representative Will and Senator Rankin, I noticed that they didn't tack with the views of the people in the 57th district. They tended to be party line votes, and they tended to go down that list of corporations that would go, in fact, and give them donations. So I noticed that they weren't representing the people. And I continue to see that if we look at their donation records, the PAC money vastly outweighs the individual donor money. So to me, that tells me that there's deficiencies in the representation of the people. I want to go down there and work for the people, stand up to corporations. Any healthcare bill that gets through with a public option in my plan will not be written by the insurance companies. It will be written for the people. And for that aspect, I have not accepted one dime of political action money.
Mr. Will, how do you respond to that?
So, I've been, I think, doing a really good job over there. And you know what my opponent says here is about some of the bills and some of our voting records. What I need to point out is when there's lots of good bills that get presented there at the General Assembly, several of them. But with each of those bills comes a fiscal note, okay? And with those fiscal notes, those great ideas and great bills, they are good. But you end up voting against them because of the fiscal note, because the state can't afford them. And in particular, several of them are behavioral health bills that would great. It'd be great for the people of the state, but we just can't afford it because of the fiscal note associated with them.
Yeah, in terms of the behavioral health bills, I think that mental health is one of the most important cornerstones of my campaign. And we know for a fact that if we treat mental health properly and fund mental health treatment properly and increase access to it, we can actually reduce costs for healthcare, reduce costs for crime, reduce the dependency for addiction, reduce drug treatment costs across the board. So while that fiscal note is there, you have to weigh that fiscal note against the cost of not funding these things and having higher costs for criminal justice, higher cost for healthcare, and those such things.
Mr. Will, prior to this forum, we noticed a great deal of interest and concern about Proposition 114. the restoration of gray wolves. What is your stance?
So my stance is I'm opposed to gray wolf reintroduction. I'm a big no on 114. I had a 40-year plus career in the wildlife biology, and I'm a trained wildlife biologist. I've been involved with introduction of multiple species throughout my career into the state of Colorado. Every time we've always did a huge habitat assessment, did analysis of how successful the species would be, and none of that was done with wolves. And so it's kind of an end around with the initiative. The Wildlife Commission is on record at least twice here just recently. The wolf plan was in 2004, but in 2016, the Wildlife Commission again did a resolution opposing the reintroduction of wolves into Colorado. And I stand by that, and I don't think it's going to be a good deal.
Mr. Wilhelm?
As I mentioned in my opening, we're in an economic crisis. We're looking at 4 to 5 years of multi-billion-dollar deficit in the state. And to me, reintroduction of wolves, while wolves have already started to reintroduce themselves into our northern counties, is not fiscally responsible at this point in time. So while it will go to the voters, and if the voters do vote for it, I would hope that down in the state legislature, we could put it on hold, because it's looking like somewhere between $6 to $10 million in next year's budget, if it passes, will have to go towards working a reintroduction plan. And if and when we do have to reintroduce wolves based off of the voters' vote, we would want to do it properly to make sure that all the things that Mr. Will just addressed happen. So that would cost a lot of money. And I don't think it's fiscally responsible to do it in the time of an economic crisis that we're in right now with the budget deficit that we're looking at.
Mr. Will, anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree. It's just, like a $6 million price tag. And there's lots of other, we're talking about K through 12 education funding and things like that, behavioral health, those type of things. That money's not well spent on that. And I also want to add that I don't think, there'll be some damage and conflict with wolves. And I don't think it's fair to the sportsmen of the state to foot the bill for that. We do it in game damage on other species, but the sportsmen should not pay for that. That should come from the taxpayers, not sportsmen.
Next question, Mr. Wilhelm. Proposition 113 was passed by the state legislature and signed by the governor to be on the ballot. If passed, it would place Colorado in a compact with a growing number of other states to eliminate the Electoral College in national elections. What is your stance?
Well, it's an interesting fact. As a lawyer, I have to look at it from the constitutional standpoint, and I really get interested in it from that standpoint, from the legal perspective. The voters will ultimately make the decision. The Constitution leaves to the states how to decide how they want to separate their electoral count, their electorals. Do they want to do it by a party vote? Do they want to do it by different districts throughout their state? Whatever way they want to do it, as long as the state decides how they want to do it, it's constitutional. The big argument against this is that it's not constitutional. But if voters decide that they want to follow the national party vote or the national vote as their deciding factor, then it would automatically become constitutional under the Constitution. I personally wouldn't vote for it because I think that tying it to the compact where 38 other states or however many other states have to pass it in order for it to become actual law in Colorado isn't as good as just Colorado deciding we want to tie our vote to the national vote. So that's what I would vote for it as.
Mr. Will.
Thank you. This is an easy one for me. I'm a no on 113, and I just think it, just lets the urban areas pick our president, and that it takes away our vote. So I'm easily a no on it.
Anything to add? Mr. Wilhelm?
I don't think it's so cut and dry as our urban areas versus our rural areas. I think it's really comes down to the states are giving their own decision on how the state voters want to proportion their electoral votes. Currently, we have a disproportionate amount of smaller rural states determining who's president right now. There's no perfect way for us to do it with the Electoral College. So ultimately, we're stuck with what we have and what the founders came up with. And in some aspects, we need to just follow the guides from our founders.
I agree.
We'll wrap up with the economy. Mr. Will, in House District 57, number of local county economies, county governments are struggling to make ends meet. What could you do as a state representative to help maybe diversify the economy?
Right, and they're trying to come up with a lot of innovative ideas of what to do with these counties. You know, when we want to attract new industry, new businesses, want to do stuff with outdoor rec industry. You know, I mean, what's our greatest asset we have here? Public lands. You know, 75%. Most of the counties represent 75% public lands. So we need to go down that road and figure out what kind of industries we can attract. Small industries, you know, don't have to be big, and people that employ people, provide jobs. And I think we have a good recreational economy and tourist economy, but we can dovetail that into all these other, especially the manufacturing. And a lot of these, I've been on the C3 Business Base Camp. I was chosen one of the 3 Republicans to do that this interim here. And we've visited all over different parts of the different districts, and I've seen, it was eye-opening what some of the small businesses are doing.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with the Northwestern Regional Economic Council and determining how we need to expand our economic drivers. And I talked about it at the beginning that we're really beholden to single industries, and every town throughout the 57th district is a little bit different in what that industry is. But we do see some downturns, and we know that up in Craig and Moffat County, those plants are going to be closing. That's not driven by politics or regulations, that's being driven by the global market. We also see that's happening in Rio Blanco County. What we need to do, I agree, increasing our outdoor rec business. We also need to bring in some other businesses, maybe even some small business farms to allow virtual working. We're seeing a lot of people are enjoying virtual working. They can come out here, have wonderful quality of lives. So we need to take on those ideas, think outside the box, find some new innovation plans, and bring back what we can, keep the jobs that we have now in segments of the industry that are going to stick around, and work from there.
Mr. Will?
So yeah, and Colin mentioned the remote working, and I think since COVID-19, that if you want to think of a positive that's come out of COVID-19, remote working has been one of them for sure. And just the other day, I was talking to officials up in Rangeley there, and they've had 17 new families move into Rangeley. So, and people want to come to, I mean, what we have to offer recreational wise and just our viewscape, everything. People want to live here in Western Colorado. And because of what's happening in our urban areas and our cities, you know, the lawlessness, people want their kids to go to school in schools, public schools and things that we have over here. So it's safe. People want to be safe. And I think that's going to be a huge boom to our economies in these rural areas.
All right, so much more to talk about, but we've got to move
Yes.
on. So, Mr. Wilhelm, 90-second closing statement.
Thank you. And thank you to all the viewers that have been watching this and listening to this. And thank you to those who have voted, and thank you to those who are going to vote. This is the most important election of my lifetime. And many people have said it, it's not cliche. One of the things that Mr. Will just discussed is how people want to come to the Western Slope and bring their kids to our schools. And that is true, but we need to make sure that we fully fund our schools now. We need to make sure that we're paying our teachers a living wage. The current minimum average wage in Colorado is $27,500 for the first year teacher. I have a plan that I'm going to introduce on day one that would raise that. It would practically double it to $54,000. So that way, no teacher would be below a living wage in the state of Colorado. And when you get me down in Denver, I'm going to work for the people, not for corporations. And I will stand up to corporations and make sure people of Western Colorado's needs are heard. Thank you.
I just like to say I'm for the people and I work for the people, and anybody that knows me knows that's a fact. So I want to get that out. But you know, I'm all about personal responsibility, free enterprise, fiscal responsibility, and smaller government. And so I try to blend all that into my work at the state legislature. And I think the situation with what we've had economically with the COVID and the shutdown, and then obviously we've had the fires and all that, it's just been a big hit to us economically. And but I'm there to work with everyone, and I have some good ideas on what we can do, I think, to stimulate some of the things over here. But number one, we need to get people back to work. And, the COVID, we keep watching and seeing what's happening with the COVID and the rates, et cetera. And, but we need to get this country back to work, and this county and state back to work. Colin mentioned the education and the teachers. I'm all for teachers. I'm all for them making the best living they can, finding a way to fund that and, make sure that we have the funding for it, because that K-12 funding is a huge issue over there. It's a big deal. And as we see our businesses slow down, they're not open, they're not working, they're not doing very well. Employees are laid off. That's just going to get worse. So the funding, the way to fund that is going to be critical. And K-12 funding is top priority of mine. Education of kids, top priority.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Good luck in the election.
Thank you.
you.
All right.